Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View on this May 2nd, 2018 day. I am Nick Pitts, subbing for Kirby Anderson, who is on a much-deserved vacation. You've got me again, Dallas. You've got me again. I am so grateful that you've decided to join us today, because we have got a great show for you today. Here in the first hour, we're going to have Bunni Pounds, who's running for Congress, representing the 5th Congressional District, which is a part of the East Dallas area, as well as stretching all the way out to Athens. She will join us in studio from the 12:15 to 12:45 segments, so those two segments. And so you're going to want to tune in, as well as potentially call in if you'd like to ask her a question as well. We'll be talking to her about the issues, as well as just about her herself, a little background as well. So you want to stick around for that. And then in the following couple hours, I'll be joined by Jonathan Bodnar, and we'll be having our Millennial Roundtable. We'll be talking about everything from kind of some of the new research that's coming out that's indicating that millennials are largely leaving the Democratic Party, but then also supporting the Republican Party. Now, granted, the millennials, when you break it down, when you break down the numbers, it appears as though the largest constituency that they fall behind is of independents. But what we're seeing is some of that is changing. So we'll discuss some of the implications of that, as well as just there was a fascinating ad that was run in Georgia for the race for governor, where there was a man, kind of what would appear to be a joke, where there was a boy that came out and he had a gun, and he was trying to date his daughter. But we'll talk about that. Is this a joke? Should we joke about that during this time? We'll talk about all of that and more on today's show, Point of View. So you're going to want to stick around and tune in, but also have the opportunity to call in as well, as always, at 1-800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And because it's the Millennial Roundtable, I hear there's about 2 billion of you that are on Facebook. And so you can tune in to Point of View on Facebook, facebook.com/Point of View Radio. And you can see the live video there. And when you see that live video, unfortunately, you will see my face. So I apologize for that. My papa would always say that I climbed up an ugly tree, I fell down, and hit every branch on the way down. But nevertheless, you can tune in, and then you can also leave a comment or question that you might have on Facebook. And what you share online, we'll share over the air as long as it's appropriate. But let's jump into a little bit of news before we have Bunny in studio, because today is May 2nd. But for many students today, it is a walkout day. Now, you'll remember last month there was a massive student walkout for individuals that were fighting for gun control. Well, this is almost the exact opposite of what's happening today, because there's a pro-Second Amendment students are planning or have already walked out of school for 16 minutes today. Now, you probably didn't hear about it too much, but the USA Today was one of the mainstream media outlets that picked it up. Students at schools across the nation are poised to walk out of their classrooms today for 16 minutes in order to be able to stand up, and the event is called Stand for the Second. It was started by a high schooler in New Mexico, and his name was Will Riley. He says students are walking out of class for 16 minutes, and they expect students in more than 40 states to join them in their walkout. However, it's important for us to understand, especially from the context of the situation, students aren't the only ones walking out of classrooms today. Teachers in Arizona, Colorado, and parts of Kentucky have walked out in protest as well. Arizona teachers have been walking out for the past couple of days because they want a 20% pay raise. Some teachers in Kentucky have walked out because they want to override the budget cuts that was put down by Governor Bevin. as well as teachers in Colorado have problems with their stagnant pay, not keeping up to pace with the standard of living. But nevertheless, what might shock you is that even though students are walking out today, and typically the younger that you are, the more liberal that you tend to be, one of the shocking things is that the numbers are indicating something that's going against what our preconceived notions might hold of these students. Specifically, respondents, according to a study out of Gallup, aged 18 to 29, are the least likely in the country to support a renewed ban on assault weapons at 49%. Anywhere from they're at least 10 points down from the next closest constituency. However, they are the least likely demographic in America to own a gun and don't view the NRA favorably, measuring at a favorability rate of 19%. So what's fascinating is you have students that are walking out that are largely against gun control measures, but also kind of in a contradictory, not necessarily contradictory fashion, but in a very twisted fashion. They're not owning a gun, nor are they supporting the NRA, which is just fascinating. Well, what we know about in the scriptures, we read how Moses protested with God concerning Sodom in Genesis 18, and how the Hebrew midwives protested Pharaoh's edict with their disobedience in Exodus 1. Obviously, protests illuminate disagreements, but they also paradoxically strengthen the bonds of unity. Look no further than when someone protests the misbehavior of another in Matthew 18:15 through 20. They're protesting this behavior that they believe to be unbecoming of a man or a woman that's trying to live in a manner worthy of the gospel, is what it would say in Ephesians 4. You see, the loving protests create temporary discomfort for the sake of long-term unifying health. John F. Kennedy was right in this regard. Without debate, without criticism, no administration and no country can succeed, and no republic can survive. And so today there are students as well as some teachers that are walking out of the classroom in order to show solidarity and support for the Second Amendment. But there's also someone else that's walking out. If we want to hit some of the issues that are more cultural issues or moral issues, one might say, is Miss Richards, who is the leader of Planned Parenthood, walked out of the Planned Parenthood office for the very last day as the leader of that organization. Cecilia Richards, who stepped down from the helm of Planned Parenthood yesterday after 12 years as one of the nation's most visible activists, and now has a message for women. She says, it's now is the time to get involved. Not soon, not next year, now. Ms. Richards, who's 60, officially exited, even though she announced her exit all the way back in January, officially exited Planned Parenthood yesterday. But she's hardly going home or going down and retiring, one might say. But rather at a star-studded annual gala for Planned Parenthood, she stood alongside transgender actress Laverne Cox, and she was promoting her new book, which is Make Trouble, which is a combination of a memoir as well as a call to action as well. I think we can all agree with Cecile Richards that now is the time to get involved. However, I think we can all disagree with how you should be getting involved. She stepped down, and hopefully abortions will continue to go down. The total number of abortions performed in 2014 numbered 926,000 approximately. A drop from 958,700 abortions performed in 2013. However, one of the unfortunate twists is that 70% of women who have had an abortion indicate their religious preference is Christian. Those that go that would identify as going in some of their civic activities would be individuals that are going to church, is upwards of 50% of those that are going to get an abortion. Abortion may never be outlawed in the courts, but hopefully our love and grace will make it unthinkable in every mind as we take to heart what Paul says to the church at Rome in Romans 2:4, that kindness leads to repentance, as well as always seeking to do good from Galatians 6:9. And so with that, we're going to have to jump to a break. But when we come back from the break, we've got Bunni Pounds that will be in studio. She's running for the 5th congressional seat here in the U.S. Congress, and you're going to want to stick around as well as call in. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or leave a question or comment on Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio, and we'll get to that over there. But we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, throughout the years, John Stossel has been trying to find ways to simplify economics and illustrate the benefits of free markets. He has found that Adam Smith's invisible hand is often invisible to his viewers. Friedrich Hayek's spontaneous order is clearer, but still hard to show. That is why he began to use some of the ideas he found in the book Rinkonomics, A Window on Spontaneous Order. The book inspired him to rent a skating rink in order to illustrate some of these key economic principles. He says, imagine you have never seen a rink and are trying to get a government regulator to approve this new business. You will flood an area, freeze the water, and then charge people to strap sharp blades on their feet and zip around the ice. There will be no rules. Most regulators would resist your bizarre skating idea. They would want stoplights, barriers, and someone on a megaphone directing skaters. John Stossel decided to do just that. He rented a rink and began to boss people around. You turn left, you slow down. The skaters hated it, and it didn't make skating any safer. Some people responding to him actually lost their balance and fell. Actually, for skating to work, you only need a few rules, like skate counterclockwise. And you might need an employee to police reckless skaters. The rest comes from spontaneous order. Skaters make their own decisions. No regulator knows the wishes, skills, and immediate intentions of individual skaters better than the skaters themselves. The principle here is simple. Let people make their own choices and spontaneous order will surface. Skaters find their own path. Buyers and sellers make lots of independent decisions in a market economy. Spontaneous order arises. This is the simple lesson from a skating rink. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, and welcome back to Point of View. This is Nick Pitts. I am filling in for Kirby Anderson, who's on a much-deserved vacation, and so you are left with the Snapchatting, Uber-riding, selfie-taking millennial. But you are, thankfully, I am not alone in the studio anymore. We've got Bunni Pounds, who's running for the 5th congressional seat here representing Texas. Bunni, so great to have you on.
So good to be here again, Nick. Thank you.
Well, we are so excited that you're here. For those listeners that might be new, Bunni is running for that 5th congressional seat. She's been on with us a couple of times so far, but we want to kind of refamiliarize ourselves for some of those new listeners that might be tuning in as well, but also to let you know she'll be on for the next 30 minutes. So you have an opportunity to be able to call in at 800-351-1212. And then for you Facebook people out there, you can leave a question or comment on facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you do that, I'll be monitoring those, as well as some of our staff will help me out. And we might be able to share some of those questions or comments that you have for Bunni over the air so that you might be satisfied with kind of some of these issues that are continue to be percolating in the day. But for those listeners that might not be familiar with you, Bunni, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, I started 2 small businesses with my husband in my early 20s after going to Bible college and thinking I was going to be a missionary to Latin America. Mm-hmm. Somehow ended up doing American business. And when I was 29, I caught the political bug listening to a lady by the name of Laura Ingraham on talk radio.
Yeah.
Talk radio is a very important medium that we have in America. Very thankful for it. So I went back to school at Dallas Baptist University at the age of 29 and graduated age 32, magna cum laude, after many months of night school. And I got my degree in political science and ended up as an intern at Congressman Jeb Hensarling's Dallas office just to graduate. And he hired me a few months later to be his campaign manager. That's been a decade ago, and It's been a great privilege to serve America, serve the 5th Congressional District by his side in all 7 counties that we have. And then I launched my own firm 2.5 years ago to help our conservative, liberty-minded candidates. And so being an entrepreneur, being someone that understands small business is really important to me.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got 2 kind of weighty kind of background credentials that I think are really could be potentially positive for someone that's running for Congress.
I believe so.
You've got the idea that you've walked alongside Jeb Hensarling for the past 10 years, helping him from a campaign perspective side, but that you've also you've got your own business. So you have a business background, a small business background, and especially for the 5th Congressional District. I mean, it's very much of small business owners, that individuals that know what it's like to be able to have to do hard work, just like many of us know what it's like to do the hard work necessary to provide for our families.
Yeah, real world experience is really important, especially when you're dealing with the federal government.
Yeah.
Sometimes they do things that don't seem sane. So someone that understands how to balance budgets, how to pay paychecks, how to make sure people get how we grow business, have long-term strategic planning skills, executive leadership. That's important for a member of Congress.
That's phenomenal. And then there's also, just because we have the faith, the freedom component to the Point of View radio show, there's obviously the faith component as well. You went to Dallas Baptist University, which I'm completely biased on this end, and I think that it's a phenomenal university.
Yes.
That you should go to dbu.edu and check out more foundation.
I have associates in theology from Christ for the Nations, and then transfer those credits to Dallas Baptist to finish my degree. And foundation in the Bible, our Christian worldview, and the political system is helpful things in the tool chest.
That's phenomenal. So tell us a little bit, how does your faith kind of inform the way that you're running this campaign and potentially could be helping govern the country?
You know, the last 4 or 5 months have taught me how to stay in peace and joy and to fight through the fear that comes on when anytime you're stepping out on the water to do something that affects people and affects our nation, you're going to have resistance. So it's been a good example to me of how to stay in peace and joy through prayer and worship, through depending on God and depending on our faith to get us through. But I believe that the body of Christ are the ones that need to rise up and be salt and light in our culture. And that applies to all of us, whether we're in the education field, media, politics, religion, whatever we are the ones that are called to be the hope of the world. And that's why I stepped up to run for this seat, because I was trying actively to find a candidate to take my former boss's place and came up short. And sometimes we become the answer to our own prayers, and that's kind of how this happened. And I believe we're going to be successful in the end in 20 days. That's phenomenal. And so we are talking to Bunni Pounds, who's running for Congress, the 5th Congressional District that many of you are a part of, that are constituents of, I might say, and then you have an opportunity to be able to lift your voice and to cast your ballot here in the next couple of weeks. And so one of the things that we want to do is also open up the phone lines to you, so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can leave a question or comment underneath that live video box, and then from there, we'll be able to share some of your questions or comments. And so we've got Tim that has said hello. And so Tim out there, hello back to you. So we're so grateful that you're tuning in. So Bunni, you talked about how you had searched, and you were trying to find a conservative candidate for this 5th congressional seat because you've just been so familiar with it for the past 10 years working with Congressman Hensarling. And then there was no one to be found and recognized that it was you. So I guess this naturally raises the question, probably for many of our listeners, is, well, why are you running? No, that's a great question. My opponent is the 5th most liberal Republican of the Texas House. He's got a dismal record when it comes to fiscal policy and our social conservative values. He voted against an amendment that State Representative Matt Schaefer brought to the floor that would close the loophole in Texas law to protect babies in the womb after 20 weeks that have fetal abnormalities or disabilities. That was a really important amendment for the pro-life movement for our state. And he voted with the Democrats against that, really in line with Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood ended up kind of making fun of State Representative Matt Schaefer for that amendment. And my opponent, voted along that line. Wow. So those are important issues. The Privacy Act, we're very familiar with that here in Texas. My opponent, 85% of his colleagues ended up co-signing, co-sponsoring one of the forms of the Privacy Act in the Texas House that, of course, never made it to the floor. because of the speaker, but he never did. He didn't think it was important. And those are big issues in my district, not counting tax and spend issues and property tax reform bill that he didn't, help Governor Abbott on.
Yeah.
So there are many things that we could talk about, but that's why we have to be solid voices, and we have to stand up and say, we are the ones that have the answers, and ask God for wisdom of how to legislate. But we can't be afraid of taking on people that don't share our values. And that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I think one of the things that captivates me when I think about the political world, but also consider the biblical narrative, is the understanding what we would know from the biblical narrative that Jesus has fearfully and wonderfully made us.
Yes.
According to Psalm 139, that he's intricately knit us in the womb of our mother. There's this idea that we're the workmanship of God, that he's gifted us and crafted us and equipped us. And there's all these components to how he's just made us. But there's those passions that kind of reverberate and come out over the top.
Right.
And so when you're thinking about just the whole host of issues that fall before us here in the American experiment, what are some of those passions that you have? What are some of those giftings that you want to bring to Congress in order to make this place a little bit better than what it was yesterday?
Well, I think a lot of people in the political world really don't go back to the Constitution. We get so caught up in the needs of our district, the needs of people, the needs of business, that we don't consider what does the Constitution say. And I firmly believe the federal government asks us to pay for certain things. The Constitution says, strengthening your military, protecting the people of the United States is important. Making sure that our veterans, our great heroes among us, are taken care of. Absolutely, that's important. Securing our border, protecting our people, again, so terrorists can't come in or anybody that would hurt Americans. Infrastructure, things that help our economy. Then there's certain things that the federal government should not be paying for. And when we look and we wake up every morning and we see this debt clock of $21 trillion continuing to tick, and we're looking at this going, how is this going to affect my 19 and 21-year-old sons? How is this going to affect my future grandchildren and all of us in America? We cannot continue to just let this clock go. We have to say no to deficit spending, and we have to say no to things that maybe the federal government should be paying for. And that is one of my biggest issues. Of course, immigration is extremely important to all of us in Texas, but throughout the United States, we're seeing illegal immigration, stealing resources from our education system, from our hospitals, from every sphere of life. We're seeing how it affects. We're seeing employers not knowing, what's going on. And we need clear distinction. We need the executive branch to stand up, and President Trump is doing that. He is saying, I was elected with a mandate to build a wall. And if it means putting National Guard troops until you guys wake up on the border, then that's what we have to do.
Wow. And so we are here with Bunni Pounds, who's running for the 5th congressional seat. We are going to have to take a break, but when we come back, we'll kind of dig more into those issues, religious liberty specifically, abortion, Second Amendment rights. But we'll be back right after this.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as district health director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team. Or 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Fitz.
And welcome back to Point of View on this May 2nd, 2018 day. I am subbing for Kirby Anderson today. He's on a much-deserved vacation. And so if you're listening, Kirby, stop. You need to rest and enjoy your vacation. And it's no pleasure to listen to me. I'm positive. And so we are so grateful that we have Bunni Pounds here in studio with us. Bunni is running for the 5th Congressional District seat. And Bunni, during the first segment, we were talking about you. We were talking about why you're running. We were talking about some of your credentials of being a small business owner, of moving and knowing the district very well, serving with Congressman Hinterling for the past 10 years. And so now let's transition a little bit. And so naturally, I guess the easiest way to transition is that there are thousands upon thousands of students in upwards of 40 states that have walked out of their schools today to be able to support the Second Amendment. And here in Texas, I would imagine in that 5th Congressional District, the Second Amendment is probably pretty important.
Oh, big.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about your stance as well as some of your positions on the Second Amendment.
Well, we've been talking about on the ground, you have one way of creating totalitarian government by taking away our religious liberties and our guns. And it's extremely important that we protect our First Amendment rights and our Second Amendment rights. Nobody is more passionate about that than I am, because I've gone back and forth to Romania, a former communist country, almost every year for the last 5 or 6 years, raising up young people in Romania. And we see the effects of what socialism and communism philosophies do. So we cannot allow violence, as horrible as they are and as compassionate as we are. But at the end of the day, we know that guns don't kill people, people kill people. Based on evil that's entered this world in our fallen world here that we're living in. So we have to be able to protect ourselves. And I think we saw in Turkey last week, knife violence, right? Yeah. So if you're going to hurt somebody or kill somebody, you're going to find a way.
I think one of the fascinating things, you talked about Romania, but then when I think about some of the people that I know that are gun owners, those are not the type of people that, now granted, all the mass murders that have happened, some of these mass casualties and tragedies, the commonality has been a gun.
Right.
And so I don't want to run away from that commonality and that lowest common denominator. But I also know all of my friends that are gun owners and that have a carry license. I think one of the things that demonstrates with them is that they're probably some of the kindest, most self-sacrificing people that I know. But there's been a perception that everybody that owns a gun is evil, but I would be interested. I would be interested to hear what you would think on that.
Yeah,
because I think a lot of people that carry guns aren't evil because we recognize the fallen nature and they're very sacrificial and that they want to help in time of need.
No, the vitriol against the NRA here coming to Dallas this week is insane. But it's just the everyday person that wants to protect their family, wants to protect their home, that wants to go hunting. I don't believe that we should lower the age. Or raise the age to be able to have a firearm. Why? Because if you can draft a young man or woman into the Army at age 18, if they get married and they have a family and they want a firearm to protect their family, they should have that right to do that.
Yeah.
We've got veterans in our district that are concerned about any kind of restrictions or laws that might take away their right to a firearm after they've served our country with honor. So, there's issues we've got to talk about. How do we deal with mental illness issues that, who decides that? A doctor? And when does it get revisited? But those are important conversations to have. But people are trying to take away our Second Amendment rights. And I've been really strong in this. I've been endorsed by the Gun Owners of America. I have an AQ rating with the NRA. It's really important that, again, First and Second Amendment rights are upheld as all of our constitutional rights.
And let's jump over to the First Amendment. So we would jump to the Second Amendment just because naturally today we have thousands of students that have walked out of schools. Let's jump over to that First Amendment.
And it's good to see young people standing up because they are the ones that people are paying attention to.
Yeah. And so let's talk about that First Amendment. So we've got the freedom to be able to speak, freedom of speech, but also religious liberty and freedom of religion. And so there's this understanding, there's almost like a hostility that seems to be in the air relative to religious liberty right now. And so tell us a little bit about some of your beliefs on religious liberty.
Well, I've followed Kelly Shackelford. He's endorsed me in this race, and everything that First Liberty has been doing for years and years. But yeah, this is really important. Me and my husband pastor a house church and have for the last 8 years in our home. We want to be able to have our own worship services, Bible studies, as should anybody be able to. And we're seeing these rights being infringed on multiple levels, whether it's government buildings, schools, in our armed forces. So we have to stand up and say, you know, this is what the Bible says. This is what I believe. And I have a right to take my beliefs into our culture. So, yeah, we have to continue to stand up as the body of Christ, and how he's doing it legally in the courts and throughout every form of government.
And so for listeners that are unfamiliar, which I would imagine most of them are, Kelly Shackelford is the president CEO of First Liberty, which fights for religious liberty rights in D.C. as well as across the country as well. He's also one of the hosts of Point of View on the Friday weekend update edition, the kind of weekend roundtable, rather, edition. And so we're talking with Bunni Pounds, who is running for Congress, the 5th Congressional District that's a part of East Dallas, as well as stretching all the way out to Athens, Texas, covering 7 counties.
Palestine, actually.
Palestine. Oh, Palestine.
2.5 hours from my house.
Okay, yeah. There it is. And home of Adrian Peterson, from what I remember. And so you can call in and ask Bunni one of the question if you'd like at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and share a question or comment in that video box, and then we'll share it over air as well. But again, let's continue to go back to that First Amendment. And so we've got obviously the religious liberty piece, but then there's also the freedom of life, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so help us understand, where do you stand on the life issue? I know that's kind of been kind of a hesitant, kind of a dividing line issue, surprisingly, even among Republicans here in the not too recent past.
I'm 100% pro-life all the way, from conception and natural death. We have to do everything we can to protect life. And that's why I was talking about my opponent's vote to not protect life after 20 weeks. If, you know, a doctor says that this baby, I will call it a baby, it is a baby, is diagnosed with any kind of abnormalities or disabilities. We have to protect life. And I believe that God is the one that makes those decisions, and life should be protected. And I feel very strongly the unborn does not have a voice. They do not have a voice, and we have to be their voice. That is our mandate as Christians, as believers, to stand up and say they don't have a voice, but we can be their voice. So, yeah, it's very important to me that we defund Planned Parenthood forever, that we take away every federal dollar that we're giving to their general budget that then, as we know, affects their ability to do business. That we make sure that the Hyde Amendment is permanent forever. That we make sure we have conscience protections for folks like our pharmacists and, you know, that don't want to hand out abortion pills. Whatever we need to do to protect people's rights to their beliefs is so extremely important. And that's what we have to deal with on the federal side. But I'm so proud of our state legislature, too, for continuing to fight these battles on the state level, too. We have to continue to push the envelope to protect life at every level.
That's phenomenal. And so Bunni, it's been such a good pleasure to have you here in studio with us. And so
wonderful.
I'll leave you with any last comments that you'd like to share with our listeners, anything that you want to stress to them, or maybe where they can find out more information, or maybe just a rousing speech if you'd like.
Yeah, well, tomorrow's National Day of Prayer.
Yeah.
And I just want to remind everyone to pray for our president, pray for our vice president who's endorsed me in this race. Thank God for Mike Pence. But pray for our leaders and remember those of us that are in the fight day in and day out. I'm so thankful for the prayer warriors and friends and people throughout the Congressional District that are praying for me and my family right now. We underestimate the power of prayer and lifting up our leaders as the Bible instructed us to do. So, yeah, I do feel good about where we are in the next 20 days. I believe that the people will see value in our values, and our conservative values will be united, and the 5th Congressional District will come away with a strong representative that will represent them well and with integrity and moral clarity. But I just encourage everyone to pray. They can find me follow us at Bunni Pounds. That's Bunni with an I, pounds.com. And I covet their prayers. And please pray for your nation tomorrow.
That's great. And so Bunni is echoing what the biblical narrative would instruct us to do, according to 1 Timothy 2, 1 and 2, to be able to honor our rulers and leaders, but then also to lift them up in prayer. And one of the ways that I think we can do that specifically is to pray for wisdom, that God is one that gives us immeasurable wisdom, but also individuals that would surround us with good counsel, because we know with good counsel, plans will prosper. And so we want to not only give wisdom to leaders, but also good counsel to leaders, that God would surround them with that. And so, Bunni, thank you so much for joining us. We are so grateful that you've done that. You can go to bunnipounds.com to be able to find out more information on Bunni and her candidacy, as well as where she stands on the issues. Or you can hop on over to pointofview.net. And on pointofview.net, you can find a link to Bunni and all her social media, as well as her website. But we're going to have to take one of those breaks. But when we come back, we're going to continue talking about some of the issues of the day, specifically a study that was put out of Cigna relative to loneliness here in the American experiment. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Steed Labotsky graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1992. He eventually found his way back to campus, this time as the tight ends coach for the Academy's football team. And like other coaches, he has a Twitter account where he describes himself as a follower of Christ, family man, and football coach. Perhaps like many of you, Coach Labotsky often posts verses from the Bible on his Twitter account. This angered an activist group, labeling his tweets as unchecked Christian extremism, and they demanded that the Academy put an end to it. The Academy looked into it and determined that, in fact, the Twitter account was a personal account not connected with the Academy, rightly concluding that it was, quote, committed to protecting an individual's right to practice any religion they choose or no religion, provided their practices do not violate policy or law or impede mission accomplishment, military readiness, unit cohesion, standards, or discipline. The activist response was vulgar and promised more antagonism against the institution, but the Academy made the right call. Had the Academy punished the coach for his personal tweets, they would have been hostile towards religion rather than neutral as the First Amendment demands. Our airmen may give up a lot to serve our country, but they do not give up religious liberty in their planes, on the gridiron, or on Twitter. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And we are back on Point of View, and I am Nick Pitts, your host for today. Kirby Anderson is on a break, and so we are so excited that you've decided to join us, and we also just had Bunni Pounds on. Bunni Pounds is running for the 5th Congressional District seat, and we talked to her about everything from First Amendment rights relative to kind of the abortion issue, as well as the freedom to be able to speak. And then also we talked with her a little bit about Second Amendment, religious liberty, and some other issues. And so if you'd like to watch or maybe listen to again some of that, you can go to pointofview.net. We've got our podcast where you can listen to that interview one more time, or you can jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. just slide it back about 30 minutes, and you can start from the very beginning. Slip and slide, get loose, not necessarily more punch than a bottle of juice. And so we will be, we'll have that as well. And so we are going to be talking a little bit more about loneliness before here, kind of to end this hour. But then in the next hour, we've got Jonathan Bodnar that's going to be joining us in studio, and we'll be talking about, we'll go back into the political world, specifically with some new research out relative to the millennials that are increasingly becoming more Republican, and what that speaks to just the general and tenor, and does President Trump have anything to do with that as well? But without further ado, let's jump into what I consider just a very fascinating study that came out yesterday. The USA Today ran the study, but Cigna was the one that put on the study, and it's just fascinating research on loneliness here in the American experiment. So young people are far more likely than senior citizens to report being lonely and in poor health, according to a surprising survey put out by Cigna that surveyed, here's the scope, 20,000 Americans. Notice what it says. It says the overall national loneliness score was alarmingly high, numbering at 44 on a 20 to 80 scale. But the prevalence of social isolation among those 18 to 22 raises even more concerns, because the younger part of Generation Z, or I guess you could say iGen is what some are terming it as, had loneliness scores of about 48, compared with those that were 72 and older, which numbered at, their score was at 39. One of the fascinating things is that many individuals are echoing what Celine Dion sang, All by Myself. Al Green is tired of being lonely, and he is not the only one. But all joking aside, let's look at some of the statistics, rather. Over 40% of adults in America report feeling lonely, according to one study. 57% of meals in the U.S. are eaten alone. In a fascinating study back in 2014, the National Science Foundation found that 1 in 4 Americans said they have no one with whom they can talk about their personal troubles or triumphs. That number doubles to more than half of Americans if immediate family is not counted. The average number of friends we have has shrunken down to just 2 from 4 25 years ago. But here's the fascinating thing. Loneliness isn't just kind of a social epidemic that we're starting to experience, but also it has physical ramifications as well concerning your health. Loneliness has the same effect as smoking 15 cigarettes a day in terms of healthcare outcomes as well as just your general health. This is a growing problem, but also a glorious opportunity for the church. The church has this beautiful opportunity to where individuals that are largely feeling isolated and alone, it has a very unique chance to be able to speak into that and to join them alongside that. To recognize the truth that if we're called to emulate God, as it says in 1 Corinthians 11:1, as those individuals that are following after Jesus, that have taken up our cross and followed after him, according to Mark 9, it's an opportunity for us to join in the midst of just that loneliness, but also to be like our Emmanuel, who is God with us. Because we recognize the truth that we were made for community. As the philosopher and writer John Donne said, no man is an island. So heeding what it says, we'll say in Hebrews 10:24 and 25, let us not forsake the gathering together of individuals. To recognize the truth that iron sharpens iron, and in order to iron to sharpen iron, iron needs to be close and present with other iron. But being made in the very image of God, we recognize that God is never alone. C.S. Lewis likened the Trinity to a dance, right? So for my Baptists that are listening, that would just be creatively moving together, one with another. And it's this unique picture and this beautiful, glorious picture of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, the three persons of the Trinity in this dance in which they're loving one another. And out of that overflow of love, we're starting to see that which is created in the mix of this. You see, there's a beautiful opportunity in the midst of this staggering problem of loneliness where the church has an opportunity to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the midst of this. And if it's the case that Europe is around 30 to 40 years ahead of us, what we saw in the UK is they recently just appointed a minister to loneliness. And so there's a sense that we don't want to follow in their footsteps in this regard. And so it's going to take, yes, the government has an opportunity as well, but the church has a glorious option to be able to be the hands and feet of Jesus in the midst of this. I'd love to hear your perspective as well. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, to see the live video feed right there, and then put your question or comment right underneath there. And then what you share online, I'll share over air as well. And so I've been taking some of the information that we know about, I've been finding on the Daily Briefing, which is a email that I send out every morning that you can sign up for at thebriefing.net. But it's just fascinating to see some of the articles that are coming out, because even there was a magazine called Fast Company had other interesting research as well. They said that we are now leaving the information age and we're moving into the reputation age now, which I thought was a fascinating twist, because he says, the writer in Fast Company in this op-ed says that we're experiencing a fundamental paradigm shift in our relationship to knowledge. It's moving from an information age, we're moving to a reputation age, in which information will have value only if it's already filtered, evaluated, and commented upon by others. Seen in this light, reputation has become a central pillar of collective intelligence today. And so what's fascinating is we're starting to see that it's not necessarily just information that we're moving towards, but we want it filtered. And so filtered through reputational and through certain sources that we have vested interest or trust in. According to Edelman's 2017 Trust Barometer, trust in media institutions is at an all-time low of 43%. People are 4 times more likely to ignore information that supports a position they do not believe in. You heard that right. 4 times more likely to ignore information that supports a position they do not believe in. That's called selective exposure as well as confirmation bias. And according to a recent Barna survey, 32% say they trust no one except their own instincts. That feels kind of right. You see what I did there? It's kind of punny. 32% say they trust no one except their own instincts. Yet, concerning advertising, consumers are 92% more likely to trust their peers over an advertisement when it comes to purchasing decisions. 92% more likely to trust their peers over an advertisement when it comes to purchasing decisions. 93% of respondents said in one survey that they buy things close friends recommended to them, and 62% said they learn about new brands from their friends. What we're continuing to see is the power of the testimony, one, of what we've always known from the biblical narrative and Revelation 12, but also this power of individuals witnessing as well as sharing their experience with certain products or services holds greater weight than the actual advertisements themselves. You see, in this age of distrust, the glistening of Proverbs 22:1 blinds readers because of the relevance. What does Proverbs 22:1 say? A good name is more desirable than great riches. A good name is more desirable than great riches. And so we are moving away from an information age to a reputation age. And so how's your reputation standing? How is your character? And so we'll be talking a little bit about that and more, but we've got to take one of those breaks. But you can call in. Number is 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. Or hop on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll have the live video feed, and then right underneath that, share a comment or question. I'll get to that over here. But we'll be back right after this.
Point of View Radio has been changing lives for a generation. Listeners have been inspired to apply themselves in all kinds of ways, to stand up as lawyers defending the Constitution and freedom, to start Christian schools, training up a new generation, to launch ministries on college campuses, even to run for and serve in Congress. So again, what are you doing to make a positive change? One way to start today is to join the Truth Team, Truth Team 360, and help us change lives. Our nation needs a Truth Team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I think you guys, y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome to Point of View. I am your guest host, Nick Pitts. Kirby Anderson is on a much-deserved vacation. I'm so glad that you decided to join us on this May 2nd, 2018 day. It is an exciting day. Not only is it Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson's birthday, but it's also Happy Truffle Day, according to some. And so we are so excited that you decided to join us for this Millennial Roundtable. Joining us at the Roundtable, we've got a longtime guest host with me. We've got Jonathan Bodnar. Jonathan, how are you, man?
I'm doing great, Nick. Thanks for having me.
Oh, so good to be here. So good to have you here. We've got quite a show for you. During the first hour for our Dallas audience, they heard a lot about what was happening relative to kind of the loneliness that's been plaguing the American experiment with some of the new research that's out. But also we heard from Bunni Pounds. Bunni is running for the 5th congressional seat for Congress here in Dallas, as well as all the way stretching out to Palestine and Athens, part of East Texas. And so you can find out more information about that interview as well as just about her at the Point of View website, going to www.pointofview.net. And so during this hour, we've got a fascinating show for you. We're going to be talking about there's a significant shift, I would argue. Statistically, I think that's correct, too. There's a significant shift that's happening relative to millennials moving over to the Republican Party. And so we'll be talking a little bit about millennials moving over to the Republican Party, as well as another fascinating article that came out of Christianity Today that indicated that Clinton voters were twice as likely to leave evangelicalism as Trump supporters, which is going to be, it's just a fascinating research. And then, of course, for our Georgia listeners, there's an ad that has come out by a GOP governor hopeful. We've got Brian Kemp, I believe, Brian Kemp, that is running for the governorship in Georgia, and he has a controversial new ad out relative to kind of some work that he has done with guns, and kind of a gun being a centerpiece of this ad. We'll be talking about that, your perception of that, as well as what's happening in the media with that as well during our time together. But as always, we're going to be opening the phone lines. We'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then we'll also be live streaming as well as taking your questions and comments on Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. And when you go over there, you'll see a live video feed. And then underneath there, you're going to be able to list a question or comment that you might have. And you can, we'll share what you share online over the air, and we'll have a conversation about that. But let's go ahead and jump into it for our first article of the day concerning millennials specifically. And so we have millennials that we're starting to see a significant move away from the Democratic Party as what's traditionally been known, and moving towards conservatism. This article was found at Yahoo, which is available on our website. It was a Reuters Ipsos national opinion poll. The online survey of more than 16,000 registered voters ages 18 to 34 shows their support for Democrats over Republicans for Congress slipped by about 9 percentage points over the past 2 years to 46% overall. And they increasingly say the Republican Party is a better steward of the economy. Now, we're seeing that's a pretty sizable shift, Jonathan. Why are we seeing this? What are we to make of this?
You know, this is interesting because I think it's an incredible thing to talk about, and I think that Democrats, kind of want to ignore it, and a lot of the Democrat media and the more liberal media and stuff, they don't want to acknowledge the fact that the millennials are such a giant piece of their voter base.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, so I think it's a wonderful discussion. I think there's plenty of reasons this is happening. And, we'll probably touch on Kanye's little breakdown there, and then Cardi B and everything as well. But I think it's a wonderful topic, and I think it's perfect to start the show out with.
So what do you think is drawing? So there's a couple of things that makes me think that there's drawing, millennials are drawn to Republicans. What are some of your hypotheses relative to why millennials are moving over to the Republican Party?
That's a very good question. I think much like when Kanye came out and when Cardi B, went on her little rant, I think it was on Snapchat, I'm pretty sure. Maybe it was on her Instagram, I don't remember. But both of them, I think for the first time, a lot of prominent, influential people are questioning their elected officials, and they're asking themselves, wait a minute, just like Cardi B said, wait a minute, what are these people actually doing? And like you mentioned, perhaps it's because Republicans, they're seeing, are better at managing, certain things. And I've got plenty of, hypotheses about it.
Yeah. So let's take one of those, for instance. And so I think one of the more fascinating things is we saw the tax plan that was passed with the Republicans, because right now, just stating the obvious, in 2016, 2017, or I guess 2017, 2018, we saw the Republicans pass a tax bill. And because they passed that tax bill, many millennials specifically are going to be experiencing some financial remuneration for that. It's going to be advantageous for them just because millennials are in such a desperate spot right now. We've got a significant amount of student loan debt that we're experiencing right now. The average college student is graduating with $30,000+ in student loan debt. The average most millennials, I think it's around 40%, have less than $2,000 in savings. That even just within the vast American experiment, 47% of Americans can't pay a $400 bill if it was presented to them right now. So we're just cash strapped right now. And I think millennials, that's extremely heightened. And so potentially could it be that millennials are seeing, just from a purely tax plan issue, that Republicans, when they're in Congress and when they're in control and when there's a Republican in the White House, I'm getting money back, and money talks, and money talks. And not only is it talking, but it's making me want to move over some. It appears that could be a reason, right?
Yes. That's the best way to put it, is money talks. And at the end of the day, any message sounds great until it starts affecting you personally, And I think the tax plan, when millennials start over the next year, 2 years, as they start seeing a lot of the effect on this tax plan and a lot of the, heightened, paychecks and whatnot, they're really going to, they're going to kind of start asking themselves, wait a minute, maybe the GOP and maybe Republicans and conservatives actually are onto something here, onto what, just onto something.
Yeah, they're going to give me some money. That's onto something. That they're onto my heart right now. That's what many millennials are thinking. And so we'd love to hear from you. You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. You can share your questions or comments, and we'll share some of those over the air as well, and when we're talking about this. And so just to give you a snapshot of what this looks like, I think what's really important of what we're seeing is that although nearly 2 of 3 young voters polled said they did not like the Republican President Trump, their distaste for him does not necessarily extend to all Republicans or translate directly into votes for congressional candidates. And so what we're saying is we're continuing to see this bifurcation, this chasm that's being created between what it means to be a Republican and then what it means to be an individual that's supporting our president. And so that forms a very tricky question, as well as a tight rope for congressional candidates to be able to walk during these midterm elections, especially if they're courting millennial voters that largely have a distaste of President Trump, but are supporting traditional Republican conservative principles. So again, we'd love to hear from you. What is your question or comment? 800-351-1212. Millennials leaving the Democratic Party. We'll be talking about that, as well as a couple of other things after we get back from a break. And so you'll want to stick around and tune in. So we'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, throughout the years, John Stossel has been trying to find ways to simplify economics and illustrate the benefits of free markets. He has found that Adam Smith's invisible hand is often invisible to his viewers. Friedrich Hayek's spontaneous order is clearer, but still hard to show. That is why he began to use some of the ideas he found in the book Rinkonomics, A Window on Spontaneous Order. The book inspired him to rent a skating rink in order to illustrate some of these key economic principles. He says, imagine you have never seen a rink and are trying to get a government regulator to approve this new business. You will flood an area, freeze the water, and then charge people to strap sharp blades on their feet and zip around the ice. There will be no rules. Most regulators would resist your bizarre skating idea. They would want stoplights, barriers, and someone on a megaphone directing skaters. John Stossel decided to do just that. He rented a rink and began to boss people around. You turn left, you slow down. The skaters hated it, and it didn't make skating any safer. Some people responding to him actually lost their balance and fell. Actually, for skating to work, you only need a few rules, like skate counterclockwise. And you might need an employee to police reckless skaters. The rest comes from spontaneous order. Skaters make their own decisions. No regulator knows the wishes, skills, and immediate intentions of individual skaters better than the skaters themselves. The principle here is simple. Let people make their own choices and spontaneous order will surface. Skaters find their own path. Buyers and sellers make lots of independent decisions in a market economy. Spontaneous order arises. This is the simple lesson from a skating rink. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View Radio. I am Nick Pitts, your host for today on the Point of View Radio Show on this May 2nd, 2018 day. I'm joined in studio by Jonathan Bodnar, and this is your Millennial Roundtable. And kind of the first topic we've been talking about is potentially a millennial exodus from the Democratic Party. That might be overstating it a bit, but since this isn't an internet ad, I wouldn't necessarily say it's clickbait. So we'll just say there was an interesting article that was out of Yahoo that was a Reuters poll that was put out that indicated that the Democratic Party is losing support among the millennial age demographic. In 2016, we'll give some contextual purposes, kind of put this into context. In 2016, 55% of millennials supported the Democrats, would self-identify as Democrats, and Republicans, that number was 27%. And then in 2018, we saw a significant downtick all the way down to 46%, but then also 28% of Republicans. But one of the things that's looming in the background there is because I'm not really good at math, I guess you could say, but that's only 74%. And so one of the things that's looming in the background is that leaves about 26%. But when you talk about external polling, especially with Gallup, there's the largest contingent of millennials are considering themselves independent voters, is what we know from other polling as well. And so we're not necessarily, I think I would make the argument that we're not necessarily seeing individuals that we are seeing them leave the Democratic Party, but not necessarily joining the Republican Party. And I guess that probably goes to what you're really good at, Jonathan, which is your expertise relative to branding, right? Like Republicans might have a branding problem.
They definitely do. And I think that's an incredibly important distinction that you just made, that they're not just leaving the Democratic Party to come over to the Republican or the GOP party, but instead, like, they're leaving and saying, look, we don't want labels, like, we don't want, principles like tacked onto us that we don't actually ascribe to. And we'll talk about, the Second Amendment in a little while and stuff. But at the same time, when you look at the branding of the Republican Party, we have a solid message that's worked for 200 some years now, but we have a massive messaging and a massive branding issue in explaining those principles, because like we were chatting about, you really do have a lot of millennials that ascribe to the same principles as a lot of same principles as Republicans do, but you don't see Republicans tapping into that. You don't see conservatives really tapping into those principles that matter to millennials.
Yeah, and so it really is just kind of a language issue, which I guess you could say probably falls in line with what Jonathan Haidt argues in his book Righteous Divide, that largely Democrats have been able to craft language that appeals to some of those core moral values within the human experience, which is why they've achieved so much success. But I think one of the fascinating things is, when I think about it, is we're just going through the issues right now, and we'd love to hear from you. Why do you think that millennials are now we're starting to see, based on polling, millennials are leaving Democratic Party and moving towards Republican Party, or moving towards favoring the Republican Party? You can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We talked about taxes earlier, and we've seen when Republicans have been in control, they've been able to pass a tax plan, and the tax plan has been advantageous for certain Americans. And money talks, and like what we said, is money's been telling us quite a different story, just because we're keenly aware of the debt that many millennials are in relative to credit card debt, which the average American has $16,000 in credit card debt. The average millennial will graduate college with anywhere from $32,000, which is that number. So money's been talking to us right now, but it hasn't been whispering sweet nothings in our ear. It's been yelling, give me away, not necessarily the stuff we want. So there's the economic piece to it. That, Jonathan, here's what I'm arguing for. I think it's also there's a foreign policy component too. Millennials are very socially aware, and their certain justice is a pretty significant issue with them. Now, granted, there's been the downside where many have been considered social justice warriors, which I think is just an interesting term that I'd love to hear a definition on, but that's for another day. But I think foreign policy, whether they recognize it or not, is very significant to millennials, simply because when we see certain things that are going on in Syria, or when we see certain things that are going on in North Korea, and we recognize that's just not the way things are supposed to be. When pictures are Otto Warmbier, when we hear about him, that's not a good thing that sits well with millennials. When we see the child that's washed up on the shore in Syria, and we recognize that that's not the way things are supposed to be, that's a justice issue. And when we see President Trump, or whenever we see the Republicans that are in power are beginning to make overtures and make moves that kind of eradicate that sense of trying to make things right, I think that has a lure for millennials as well, to see the wrongs be made right.
And that's why you see progressives really winning the war over immigration is because of those powerful images that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. Because you see, CNN just constantly touting these stories about these people coming, to America from Mexico, and how hard their lives are and everything. And that's why, because we have such a, bone for social justice, it's a very, very, very powerful tool when a millennial sees, a family being abused and, not being able to come into the country, and then instantly tacking that onto it's Donald Trump's fault.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so then this brings us to the second point. So we've got the taxes being one issue that potentially could be the reason why millennials are leaving the Democratic Party, because the Republicans that are in power have given us back some of that money in the form of tax cuts and refund checks. I think the second component is the evil component. I think the millennials largely, we recognize the wrongs in the world, and we want to be a part, or we want to see our leaders do something that's right. And so kind of our actions in Syria specifically, or North Korea, we're starting to make overtures towards peace. It appears as though with foreign policy. I think the third thing would be the Second Amendment, which I think is very interesting for some of our listeners. What's happening right now is that today there's been a huge walkout in schools. There's a pro-Second Amendment walkout that's planned. We knew last month there was a walkout relative to gun reform, but what's happening today is students across the nation walked out in what was called, was started rather by a high schooler in New Mexico, but it was called Stand for the Second, and students walked out of classes for 16 minutes today in across 40 different states. And why many of us would think, well, that's probably that wouldn't be that big. But one of the fascinating things of what we're finding with the research is that millennials, that's a demographic, especially relative to 18 to 29-year-olds, are least likely in the country to support a renewed ban on assault weapons at 49%. Millennials are largely they might not be gun owners, but they're supporters of the Second Amendment. And that's been one of the issues, Jonathan, that really Republicans have stayed pretty true to, the Constitution as well as the Second Amendment. So could that potentially be it?
Yeah, I think this is, again, a issue of just labels. Like the Democrats just trying to put labels on millennials and on other demographics too. I mean, you see a lot of minority demographics, people like Kanye and Cardi B both standing up and saying, "Wait a minute, we're not aligning to all of these things that you just slap on us. Why can't we have our own opinion that differs from the Democratic opinion?" And then you've got people like Chance the Rapper even standing up and saying, "You know what? Black people don't have to be Democrats. African Americans can think for themselves." And it's like millennials as well. Millennials can think for themselves, and they don't have to ascribe to exactly, your idea of, what your good old Democratic millennial looks like.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fascinating things too, because again, when we look at the Second Amendment, we also see what we saw with out of the original polling that indicated that millennials would potentially be moving over to the Republican Party. We know they're leaving the Democratic Party, but potentially be moving over to the Republican Party, but there's still the distrust for President Trump. So I think that's an important distinction that we have to make, that they are leaving the Democratic Party, but they're not necessarily joining full frontal the Republican Party, but rather they're supporting Republican principles, but they're not supporting President Trump. With that, as well as what we see relative to the Second Amendment as well. So the Second Amendment, one of the biggest proponents and advocates for the Second Amendment would be the NRA. Well, among millennials, they had the lowest favorability rating of the NRA of any of the age demographics, measuring at only 19%. So though they support the Second Amendment and the ability to be able to exercise the right to bear arms, one of the things that we're seeing is that they don't necessarily align with the NRA. They have a low favorability rating with that, which again is just a very fascinating kind of twist in their support. And so we would love to hear from you. You can call and tell us what you think about millennials and millennials potentially leaving the Democratic Party and starting to embrace the Republican Party, but still have a little bit of the distaste for Trump, a little bit of the distaste for the NRA. You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Or jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Share your question or comment. And when we come back, there's a couple of other issues that I think are reasons why Republicans are starting to experience this millennial movement. We'll be back right after this.
Does point of view make any difference? I think Dr. Eric Walsh would say it does. Dr. Walsh was fired from his job as District Health Director for the state of Georgia, not because of anything he did or failed to do on the job, but because of sermons he preached in his local church. What does that have to do with point of view? Jeremy Dyes of First Liberty represented Dr. Walsh, and in February, the state of Georgia paid a large settlement for their religious discrimination. And Jeremy Dyes became an attorney specializing in defending religious liberty, greatly because of what he learned listening to Point of View Radio as a child. That is the kind of difference you make when you support the Truth Team, but we can't make that difference without your help. Become a partner today in this important mission of speaking truth in love. Join the Truth Team at pointofview.net/team. Choose your giving level, stretch a bit, and please do it today. Or call 800-347-5151. Pointofview.net/team. or 800-347-5151.
Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick
Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, filling in for Kirby Anderson today, who's on a much-deserved vacation. We have been talking about our first article that's listed on the website, pointofview.net, the fact that recent polling indicates that millennials largely are beginning to leave the Democratic Party and swing on over to the Republican Party. What's fascinating is, according to, if you look back to 2016, there was a 55% of millennials would identify as Democrats, and then now in 2018, that number has jumped down, I guess fallen down to 46%, a 9% drop. And then when you think back to 2016, 27% of Republicans millennials would identify as Republicans. And that really is just, it's kind of stayed the same. It's jumped up around 10 points that some would argue. But again, I think that's subject to interpretation. What's been fascinating, according to this Reuters Ipsos poll, but nevertheless, what we're starting to see is that there's a decrease in Democrats. Individuals that are millennials in nature are not identifying as Democrats. And there has been an increase in Republicans. And so we have opened up the phone lines for you to call in. That number is 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. And then we got facebook.com/pointofviewradio, where you can share your question or comment. And Owen says, I hope they're leaving Democrat and Republican parties and embracing libertarian philosophy. And I guess just from my own convenience sample of some of the people that that are in my circles, I would say that there is a sense that there's a libertarian stance to some of my millennial friends. I think that's starting to grow in number, especially as Atlas Shrugged and Ayn Rand continues to move forward. But we're going to jump on over to some phone calls as well. And so we're going to go to Yvonne that's in California right now. Yvonne, are you there?
I'm here, yeah.
Hey, Yvonne. What is your question or comment?
Well, I didn't really have a question. My comment is, you had said something about the millennials moving, from the Democratic Party, over to the Republican Party. And in my household, I have 3 millennials, and they're not moving from. They're already in the Republican Party.
Wow.
And their views are very, conservative and, respectful of our nation's laws and, just what our country has always stood for. So I think it's interesting how, they can be, they are categorized, because you are in this age group, you are automatically in this, other group of people when they're actually not. And their beliefs are, they're not being portrayed in the media, I don't think, as well as they should be, as conservative as they actually are. Yeah.
So
I just think it's interesting.
So a follow-up question, speaking for them, is there a reason why they're in the Republican Party? Is there a particular issue that kind of causes them to gravitate towards the right instead of the left?
I think just the, extreme, we're Christians and we believe, what the Bible says about a lot of things that, are not right in this world. And, I think standing against those sometimes, I want to speak for them, but I kind of, the real thing is like abortion, our gun laws, immigration, we are just more conservative in our beliefs, and that's where their party falls in, so it's sometimes not really a party, but it's what we believe. And
yeah, I think you. Go ahead.
Some of the views that are just so, anti-family and anti, God. The Democrats are just not like what they used to be, say, 50 years ago. They were actually more conservative as well, and I think our kids are just. Their beliefs are just so strong in what is actually right and what's right in God's eyes.
I think you bring up 2 great points, Yvonne. I think there's really 2 significant points that you brought up. Is the fact, one, they were raised in a conservative household. What the numbers continue to indicate, based on research, is that largely children are going to follow after their parents in some of their political beliefs. They're going to fall kind of in line. They're more likely to be Republican if their parents are more Republican in nature. They're more likely to be Democrat if their parents are Democratic in nature. And then a second point that I think you really highlight, which I think is a key point, is It's only in recent history that we've seen conservatives and evangelicals gravitate towards the Republican Party. There used to be a day back in the 1970s where you had many evangelicals that would fall in line with in celebrating the fact that you had a Jimmy Carter, who was a born again Christian Southern Baptist peanut farmer from Georgia, that were supporting him. It's only been in recent history that we've started to see evangelicals gravitate towards the left. Because again, we know that the biblical narrative is not a policy book, but rather it's a storybook that's pointing back to a greater story, which is how God so loved us that He sent His only begotten Son to save this world, to redeem this world, in order that we might make His kingdom come, His will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And I think that can be accomplished on both the Democratic and Republican side, but I think largely it's going to be accomplished through His church and His bride. And so we always want to be very cautious when we say that one side has a kind of an exclusive right on the God's issues when it comes to the Republican and Democrats. But Jonathan, she brings up a really great point in that, again, what we continue to say at the previous segment, that taxes, that foreign policy, and the justice and the evil and the Second Amendment are still holding a pretty significant weight for millennials right now.
Yeah, I think there's two things that Yvonne pointed out that are, just you can't ignore them. The first thing is who's parenting your children. Mm-hmm. She sounds like a wonderful mother. She's got, these 3 millennial children who were raised, with biblical principles and everything. And if you ask yourself, okay, so you look at the mass majority of millennials, and are the parents there, and the numbers would say no. And the numbers would say that schools are the ones raising them. And, I don't want to go down a indoctrination, rabbit trail, but at the same time, it's like, who's actually raising your children? It's a lot of millennials, they get their principles from professors and teachers. And a lot of those teachers and professors, don't subscribe to the same, ideology that your parents would.
The numbers are very clear. I mean, you have 40% of children today that are born into unwed families, and so I think that's a clear number that we can point to. Another clear number we can point to is just based on research out of the Denison Forum that they've kind of compilated. And what's continued to see is that there is a left, there's more of a liberal bent and progressive bent towards some of these educational institutions. And so that's just what the numbers indicate. I mean, it's not necessarily just an intuition or a feel, even though we're millennials and we love our feelings. That's just what that's what the facts say. And so it's just very interesting. But, Jonathan, I'd be anxious to hear from you. We're going to continue taking phone calls, 800-351-1212. But, one of the fascinating things is what we talked about when we were talking about the Second Amendment is that there's this specifically the idea that millennials want to support the Second Amendment and gun rights, but the distaste they have, the unfavorability rating relative to NRA. And what we also saw with President Trump as well, they're moving towards the Republican Party, but there's a distaste and unfavorability towards President Trump. And so, again, that's just it's just fascinating, especially from a branding point, right?
Exactly. Branding. It all comes down to how an organization or a person is branded in the mass media, not on Fox News, not on, on the radio, but the mass media. And most, mass media outlets are owned by liberals. So you've got Facebook. We talked about that a couple weeks ago. You've got CNN, MNBC. And a lot of it comes to, the branding of the NRA and Trump up against, this superimposed image of you've got, NRA to the left, and then you've got, some gun violence, story to the right. And you've got this association that happens in millennials' heads of, oh, well, the NRA is now, they're now the cause of this issue, or Donald Trump is the cause of these immigrants, coming over here, not having a home.
Yeah, I think that's going to be one of the fascinating things of what we continue to see. It's just fascinating to me that again, millennials largely are individualistic. They're very me-oriented individuals, as the Time magazine kind of article and headline indicated, and kind of labeled them Generation Me. And so we see these individuals that largely do not want to associate with some of these bigger entities, hence the reason why many of them are still independent. They have the largest age, they're the largest demographic, the contingency, I should say, rather, that identifies as independent among the age demographics. But also, too, of what we continue to see is, yes, they want to support the Second Amendment, but they're not necessarily in support or view favorably the largest advocacy organization relative to the protection of the Second Amendment, which is the NRA, National Rifle Association, measuring a favorability rating of 19%. And so what does that say for millennials? And we haven't even talked about the life issue, which we're going to get to, because that's some of the shocking numbers, that the millennial generation is one of the largest pro-life, most significant pro-life generations that we have seen here in the American experiment. We're going to be talking about that and a little bit more about why millennials are moving towards the Republican Party. We'd love to hear from you as well. 800-351-1212, or jump on over to facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We'll be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Steed Labotsky graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1992. He eventually found his way back to campus, this time as the tight ends coach for the Academy's football team. And like other coaches, he has a Twitter account where he describes himself as a follower of Christ, family man, and football coach. Perhaps like many of you, Coach Labotsky often posts verses from the Bible on his Twitter account. This angered an activist group, labeling his tweets as unchecked Christian extremism, and they demanded that the Academy put an end to it. The Academy looked into it and determined that, in fact, the Twitter account was a personal account not connected with the Academy, rightly concluding that it was, quote, committed to protecting an individual's right to practice any religion they choose or no religion, provided their practices do not violate policy or law or impede mission accomplishment, military readiness, unit cohesion, standards, or discipline. The activist response was vulgar and promised more antagonism against the institution, but the Academy made the right call. Had the Academy punished the coach for his personal tweets, they would have been hostile towards religion rather than neutral as the First Amendment demands. Our airmen may give up a lot to serve our country, but they do not give up religious liberty in their planes, on their gridiron, or on Twitter. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host, Nick Pitts, for this Millennial Roundtable, May 2nd, 2018 day. We have been talking about millennials largely leaving the Democratic Party and joining the Republican Party. The numbers are very clear according to a Reuters Ipsos poll where it said in 2016, 55% of millennials identified as Democrats, and now that number has dropped to 46%, but we have seen a slight uptick relative to the Republicans, millennials that are joining the Republican Party, but many of them still lie in that independent space, and we've been kind of going through rationales and reasons as to why they might be doing that. We talked about everything from how money talks, and so the tax plan that was passed through. We've been talking about foreign policy, about millennials are largely interested in justice issues, and so the movements towards Syria, the movements towards North Korea, that's seen as justice, and that's something that millennials largely gather around. The third thing, millennials are largely pro Second Amendment, very heavily want to have the right to bear arms. They might not be bearing arms according to the research. They don't necessarily own guns, but they at least want the right not taken away from them for them to own guns. And we're also opening up for you. You can call in, tell us the reason why, or your thoughts on millennials and the Republican Party. And what we're beginning to see is kind of a movement towards that. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, 800-351-1212. And then for those in Facebook land, we hear you and we see you. And so you can go ahead or not necessarily see you. That's Facebook probably does that, but that's a whole different story. You can leave a question or comment on Facebook and put that right underneath the live video feed box, and we'll share your question or comment on air as well. And so we're going to jump on over to the phone lines. We've got Jenny, who is over in Georgia right now. Are you there?
Yes, I am, and I appreciate your taking my call. When you were looking at the demographics, I was wondering if it was looked at also by area of the country, because the South has often been considered a big Democratic area, moving more toward Republican. And I was wondering if there was a demographic that would show anything on the East Coast or the West Coast that show that people are leaving the Democratic Party. That's one question. And also, I would wonder what education are these 16,000 people? Is it mostly college educated, or was there less educated, and that kind of thing? The third thing is the colleges and universities overall, secular universities, are predominantly liberal. So it's surprising that there would be college-educated people that would turn more toward leaving the Democratic Party, since it is very socialistic. And socialism is being taught more and more in public schools, even high schools, not just colleges and universities. And people like Bernie Sanders have a lot of appeal because one of his platforms, as I understand it, is to give free student loans or forgive all the student loans, which I would think that millennials would gravitate to that specifically. The other thing is that often millennials gravitate more to accepting homosexual marriage and homosexuality overall. So that's another thing that I would wonder why they would gravitate more toward the Republican Party, since they are stronger in that arena. And as evidenced by the Democratic Convention, that they tried to eliminate God even out of their platform, much less just have a totally liberal agenda for their platform. And the other thing is that you mentioned pro-life issues, and I'm wondering if that would be a consideration as far as moving from the Democratic Party, since they are straight down the line, pro-abortion, pro-death. So, and one other thing, do they ever pay attention to Supreme Court decisions? And does that affect their point of view?
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. So I guess I think you've brought up 7 points, and so we'll try to work through those. Thank you so much for your phone call. I know one of the things that, relative to kind of the last point, Supreme Court justices, unfortunately, just based on general research that kind of overlay the entire the U.S. and not specific to millennials, unfortunately, there's one too many individuals that believe that Judge Judy is a Supreme Court. And I know that sounds very silly right now, but I am not lying when it says that there are a number of individuals that believe Judge Judy is a Supreme Court justice, numbering 10%. 37% could not name a single right protected by the First Amendment relative to just a number of people. 10% of American college graduates incorrectly think that Judge Judy is a member of the Supreme Court, which I think is just a very fascinating and unfortunate number. But nevertheless, let's tackle some of your issues that you raised. I think one of the first things is we continue to see that millennials are largely college educated. They're the most educated generation of any age demographic here in the U.S. Just to give you a look at some of the numbers, 33.4% of individuals that are 25 and older hold a 4-year college degree. Just even 10 years ago, that number was at 28%. So we've seen a pretty sizable jump of over 5% in 10 years, a number of individuals that are holding a college degree. And then we're also, just compare that to all the way back in 1940. In 1940, only 4% of those 25 and older held a college degree. So we're starting to see a very sizable difference relative to the number of individuals that are holding a college degree. especially when you consider the fact that, again, just based on the research, that it's typically more left-leaning in these educational institutions than it is right-leaning. And so there is a lack of diversity relative to political ideology on some of these issues. And then you bring up kind of the geographic locale. Well, traditionally, the South has been, in recent history, has been much more red than it has been blue. But even just 50 years ago, it was much more blue than it was red. And so the polling does not give us an indication relative to where these millennials are largely turning from right now. But if I had to have a hunch, I would argue that individual millennials in the South typically tend to lean more to the Republican side. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, Jenny brings up two important things, like you just mentioned, the South being largely becoming more and more Republican. And the interesting thing with that is, 50 years ago when the South, was strongly, Democrat and everything, and we find this trend, and the numbers would suggest that the South becomes less and less racist as as time passes, and more Republican as time passes in the past 50 years, which is interesting because so often you associate Republicans with the racist. And how can that be if in the South a mass majority of, the South is becoming more and more Republican? And the second point, she talks a lot about socialism, like you mentioned a second ago, a lot of millennials being educated in college and everything. And, Bernie Sanders being kind of that, central point of socialism right now. And him, we're pretty sure he's going to run again here on, getting rid of student debt and everything. And I think that goes all the way back to our branding issue of free versus freedom. And, Republicans have a very strong freedom message, and Democrats have a very strong free message.
Yeah, I think that's one of the fascinating things. So he brings up the socialism issue because there was a Harvard study that was put out that among millennials, there was a significant contingent of them, upwards to 46 to 51%, that viewed socialism very favorably. But as Margaret Thatcher alluded to often when thinking about socialism, the problem with socialism, according to Thatcher, is that you eventually run out of other people's money. And so that would be kind of an unfortunate issue. So we've been talking about millennials and largely how they are exiting the the Democratic Party, moving towards Republicans, and reasons why that might be happening. We outlined the taxes, money talks, with many millennials in debt right now. The tax plan giving money back to millennials was very advantageous. Foreign policy and the justice issue relative to Syria, they're seeing that as a positive. The Second Amendment, millennials are largely very big fans of the right to bear arms. And then the life issues. Millennials are largely pro-life individuals, that the majority of them are pro-life. And so typically those have been things that the Republican Party can rally around. And potentially this could be the reason why many millennials are starting to gravitate towards the Republican Party. We'd love to hear from you, but we got to take one of those breaks. And so you can call in at 800-351-1212 or Facebook.com/PointOfViewRadio. We'll be back right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
I
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kirby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of view, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kirby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging. Apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, friends and society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now,
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am your host today, Nick Pitts, for the second hour of Point of View. I'm joined in studio around the Millennial Roundtable. We've got Jonathan Bodnar here with us, who is an individual it's very familiar to many of us. And so we have been talking about during the first hour, we were talking about with Bunni Pounds, who was running for the 5th congressional seat here in U.S. Congress that represents kind of the East Dallas all the way out to Athens and Palestine area of Dallas, or I guess Texas area. And so we were talking with her in studio. So if you wanted to jump back over to that conversation, you could jump on over to pointofview.net and listen to that, or on facebook.com/pointofviewradio to hear more about that. And then during the second hour, we were talking about kind of a new poll that came out through Reuters and Ipsos that was talking about how millennials are largely leaving the Democratic Party, and it appears as though the favorability among Republicans is growing. In 2016, that number of 55% of millennials identified as Democrats, and now in 2018, that number dropped to 46%. And relative to Republicans, that number has increased as well over the past 2 years, upwards of 10 points. And so what we're continuing to see is that millennials are largely moving towards Republican principles. And so during the first hour, we were talking about everything from reasons why they might do that, because of taxes, because money talks, relative to justice issues with Syria and North Korea, the desire for peace on the Korean Peninsula, the Second Amendment. Millennials largely don't own guns, but are supportive of the Second Amendment. And then the fourth being the life issue, the significance of wanting, this is one of the most pro-life generations, age demographics specifically, in the American constituency, and so what that looks like. And we've also been taking some of your phone calls. Why do you think millennials are so likely to vote or likely to gravitate towards the Republican Party? And so we've been taking some of your phone calls. We'll continue to take your phone calls, 800-351-1212. Again, that number's 800-351-1212. Or people out in Facebook land, you can go to facebook.com/pointofviewradio, share your question or your comment, and we'll share what you share online over the air, as long as it's appropriate. And so we're going to jump on over to the phone calls now. And so we have got someone from Texas. Yes, ma'am. Are you there? Anybody there? All righty then. Somebody from Texas.
Are you talking to me?
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry. I'm
Okay.
outside. Kind of a breezy day here. I want to thank you first for keeping the truth alive.
Oh, you're very welcome.
We sure need to hear it, and I'm talking about our Jesus. It occurred to me, sir, because I'm in the public school system, and I come up against that because I work with several in that age group. I'm not necessarily a millennial.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll just sum it up this way, because I was called into the administration office about it. They called it conflict. So when I was back, and I always try to meet the teacher that I substitute for to let them know that I am standing for the truth. It takes me back. I do a little bit of a repeat. When we did see you at the poll, one of the teachers recognized me, and I said, she wanted to know what I was praying for, and I said, godly teachers. She said, oh, and stepped back. And then I said, I started going on, I said, the administration for the safety of our school, and she just stepped back further, till I couldn't see her. She didn't say anything. I thought, oh, Lord, help me. And then when one of the others passed by, she said, what's going on? I said, I think I offended her, but I said, I was the gist of it was I'm trying to tell her that we need to change our national anthem, and I'm going to say that very lovingly, respectfully, and I've said it before, that we need to change it to Stand Up for Jesus. And she said, well, yes. She says, that's a little too, I think she called it Christian-y. And I said, yes, ma'am, because our society, our culture, even our government in some ways is taking us too far away from where we need to be. We were created. I'm not moved from the zoo, and I want to listen to my Creator.
That's fascinating. So thank you so much for that phone call. I think that's one of the interesting things of what we're continuing to see here in the American experiment, especially since Republicans have largely, and evangelicals have largely gathered behind this Republican constituency right now. Upwards of 81% of evangelicals supported President Trump in the 2016 election. And there's this growing sense now that they want to double down. And I think that's one of the interesting things here in the American experiment is that evangelicals largely have not been given a privileged position at the table, but rather have just fought for their ideas to be heard on the table. And I think that's one of the beautiful things about America, Jonathan. It's the sense that whether you're evangelical or whether you're a Muslim or whether you're an atheist or an agnostic, that we're all equal. Not only are we equal before the cross, that we all stand on equal ground, but here in America, you have the opportunity because of your inalienable right to give voice to some of the things that you'd like to see and put your proposition out there, and the opportunity for the mass populace or for the constituency that you're before to either vote it up or vote it down. I think that's one of the cool things that we have here in the U.S.
Yeah, it definitely is one of the beautiful things about America. And she even mentioned the national anthem. And I think one of the most beautiful thing about, America in general is that freedom, freedom of religion. And we're not going to, the Constitution is based on a lot of biblical principles, but it is not a biblical document, and it doesn't, directly cite a lot of the, the stories in the Bible and everything because of our freedom of religion and the power that we have to, not just believe in what we want, but allow those beliefs to affect the choices that we have.
I think that's one of the beautiful things about what the founders did. Before we go into break, just a little history lesson. One of the interesting things is this whole idea of separation between the church and the state really originated all the way back in the 17th century. You've got a letter to Cotton Mather that was penned by Roger Williams, who would become the founder of Rhode Island. And what he gave is this imagery of the separation between the church and the state. And he gave the illustrative position of it being the church being a garden and the state being this wilderness. And his original intention wasn't necessarily to keep the church out of the state, but rather to keep the state out of the church. We've kind of flipped it around backwards now, where there's this understanding that the church can't infiltrate any parts of the general society, which was never the case. The case was always that they wanted to keep the state from infiltrating and from adulterating or messing up or modifying the church, wanted to keep the church, the garden, in Williams' language, very pure. And that's even when you go fast forward over 100 years, and when you see Thomas Jefferson in 1801 to his letter to the Danbury Baptists, he again is using that imagery because he believes it to be true, that the church is this entity. Religious people tend to produce virtuous people, and virtuous people are a good ally to limited government. When you've got virtuous people, you have to have less child protective services because you have individuals that are taking seriously the idea from James 1:27 to care for the orphans and the widows. When you've got religious people, they're taking very seriously caring for those that are in the prisons, as you remember those who are in prison from Hebrews 13 and from Matthew 25. When you've got religious individuals, you have this sense of they're taking care of the marginalized so that the government services and entities don't have to take care of those because religious individuals are taking care of those. Religious individuals, regardless of your religious background, typically tend to produce virtue, but Christians specifically are supposed to be doing some of these services that government's providing. And so when there's religious freedom to be able to operate outside of the Sunday morning experience, but all throughout the week, it's less government that's necessary. And that's one of the beautiful things about the U.S. Whether you're religious or not, you get to exercise your freedom of beliefs, and hopefully that works for the prosperity of our country. We'll be back right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
You know, throughout the years, John Stossel has been trying to find ways to simplify economics and illustrate the benefits of free markets. He has found that Adam Smith's invisible hand is often invisible to his viewers. Friedrich Hayek's spontaneous order is clearer, but still hard to show. That is why he began to use some of the ideas he found in the book Rinkonomics, A Window on Spontaneous Order. The book inspired him to rent a skating rink in order to illustrate some of these key economic principles. He says, imagine you have never seen a rink and are trying to get a government regulator to approve this new business. You will flood an area, freeze the water, and then charge people to strap sharp blades on their feet and zip around the ice. There will be no rules. Most regulators would resist your bizarre skating idea. They would want stoplights, barriers, and someone on a megaphone directing skaters. John Stossel decided to do just that. He rented a rink and began to boss people around. You turn left, you slow down. The skaters hated it, and it didn't make skating any safer. Some people responding to him actually lost their balance and fell. Actually, for skating to work, you only need a few rules, like skate counterclockwise. And you might need an employee to police reckless skaters. The rest comes from spontaneous order. Skaters make their own decisions. No regulator knows the wishes, skills, and immediate intentions of individual skaters better than the skaters themselves. The principle here is simple. Let people make their own choices, and spontaneous order will surface. Skaters find their own path. Buyers and sellers make lots of independent decisions in a market economy. Spontaneous order arises. This is the simple lesson from a skating rink. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kirby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Hey, welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, your guest host today. Kirby Anderson is on a much-deserved vacation, joined in studio during the Millennial Roundtable on this May 2nd, 2018 day by Jonathan Bodnar, and we have been talking about millennials largely leaving the Democratic Party and making their way towards the Republican Party. And we've been talking about reasons why that could possibly be, identified a couple of issues. But now we're going to talk about another type of exodus that's happening, another type of movement that's happening, still political in nature, still the freedom component, still the faith component, but specifically we're going to get in talking about religion and politics. So I apologize if my mother's listening right now, because I know that's the two things you're not supposed to talk about in polite company. So please see this as a character defect of mine and not an indictment against who I think you all are. But nevertheless, there's our second article of the day. Did politics lead some evangelicals to defect from evangelicalism? And so this is the second article that's on our website. Clinton voters twice as likely to leave evangelicalism as Trump supporters. This was found on Christianity Today, and it was the data from the Democracy Fund Voter Study Group. And what was fascinating, Jonathan, is that they polled individuals that were among those who said they were born again in 2011. And then based upon the 2016 election, what they found is that 16.2% of Clinton voters left evangelicalism relative to the whole sample. 11.9% left after the 2016 elections, but Trump voters at a number of 8.8%. So again, to run those numbers one more time, they had to identify as born again before 2011, and then after the 2016 election, 11.9% left. Just a general 11.9% left evangelicalism. of that 11.9%, when you broke it down, you saw 16.2% of Clinton voters left evangelicalism, and then 8.8% of Trump voters left evangelicalism. So, Jonathan, this brings up a great question as to why you think they left evangelicalism after the 2016 election. What a whirlwind.
You know, you said something last segment. You said virtuous people equals a better society. And I think that's an impeccable way to explain this whole entire thing. Virtuous people have principles. They're truth driven. And I think at the end of the day, I think that without that, the ultimate truth, without having a ground and a foundation to stand on, everything is up in the air. And I think that that's the entire progressive message, is that, well, truth is, objective truth is up to you, and you get to decide your own principles. And I think that, that is in direct relation to Democrats leaving a lot of the Clinton supporters leaving the church, almost double, you cited more than double, left from, the Clinton camp than they did from the Trump camp, because, in my opinion, it's directly related to the lack of foundational truth.
So let's just get down. Let's boil down to it, because at the end of the day, 11.9% of evangelicals left after the 2016 election. So the idea that politics would cause someone to leave the church is, I think we can all agree, is very sad. It's very sad, right? I think we can all agree that politics is very sad. I think there's a component to it that makes me really sad about it. And I think the first rationale and reason would be how we've made politics ultimate. We've idolized politics being the thing that has been able to solve all our problems. And so we can see this on the right and on the left as well, right? This isn't just an exclusive left issue. This isn't just an exclusive right issue. This is an entirety issue that's more human error than anything. If we look at the biblical narrative, James 4:1 says, "What are the sources of quarrels and conflicts among you? Are they not your own desires?" And so there's an ultimating of politics that's happening right now. So I think that's the first one. But I would love to hear from you. We'd love to hear from you. What do these numbers mean to you? Why do you think there were more Clinton supporters that left evangelicalism than Trump supporters? What do you think of the fact that 11.9% of people that were born again before 2011 left the church, left evangelicalism after the 2016 election? You can call in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. Would love to hear from you. And so here, Jonathan, I want to spell out the first reason why. There's just this, we've made politics ultimate. And so we can't even have these conversations anymore. I'm always so hesitant with my friends to even bring up politics, because I don't know whether they were full on President Trump during the 2016 election, whether they're hesitant, closet Trump supporters, and they just didn't say it in public company, whether they were never Trumpers, whether they were on board with Hillary, whether they were third party. It seems like politics is, we can't even talk about it anymore, right? Am I alone in that?
No, it's very, very hard to talk about politics to anybody, unless you're on the radio. It's kind of like a keyboard. Yeah. Keyboards make anybody a lion. So you can stand up here and you can say anything, but when you sit in front of, a friend that disagrees with you or whatever, it's just silence, radio silence.
Yeah, it's just so fascinating that and I don't remember a time when we made it so ultimate. Like, I don't remember a time that someone couldn't just say, well, I supported this person and this person. And then obviously what characterized the 2016 election, you just had the lesser of two evils continued to be this kind of refrain that happened during the 2016 election. So I just bemoan the fact that 11.9% of evangelical born-again believers before the 2011 election left evangelicalism because of that. I think that's something that we can all lament. And then the second thing is, I just think there was a character component to it, right? Like in the ultimating it and making it ultimate, there were individuals that just said, I can't believe how you could support Clinton, right? Because the character issue relative to the life, relative to justice, relative to emails, relative to Benghazi, all those issues. And you just couldn't believe somebody's character would cause them to support that. And then you go to President Trump, and my goodness, a porn star has sued president. We have a porn star that has sued the president right now. That's got to be the first time in history. Maybe Zachary Taylor. I don't know. First time in history that we'll just go ahead and say that a porn star is suing the president, whether that was the Access Hollywood tapes, whether it's the fact that this is his third wife, whether it was just his words that he used, whether it was the marginalization that he used towards different ethnicities. I think there was the character issue that was illuminated as well, right? All right, does that make sense?
It does. And I think, in your term, ultimating it, I think a big piece of that is identity, how much identity we wrap around, whatever candidate. It's kind of like a sports team, oh, you like the Cowboys,
Yeah, I know.
And they're falling to pieces, and everybody's got to judge you because you like the Cowboys, and I don't. But
you bring up a great point, though. We can't even, we can disagree on issues. I disagree with almost everybody in this studio right now as to what is real barbecue. Coming from the South, I believe it's pork that's real barbecue. Everybody disagrees with me, but my disagreement with them is not going to cause me to break friendship with them. I can just openly disagree and feel sorry for you because you haven't tasted the kindness and goodness of pork barbecue. But when it comes to politics, we can't do that anymore. We just, it's become this idolized thing that we can't even talk about anymore, which is so frustrating.
You get pretty passionate about Peeps, though, and when I told you I didn't like Peeps,
our friendship is over. The only reason why we're talking right now is because we're right here in studio.
But the big fact that so many people adopt it as their identity, I think that goes all the way back to one of our earlier callers. I believe her name was Yvonne, and parenting, and how when parents don't instill God at such a young age, we as humans need something to be something to aspire to and something to lead us. And because God and ultimate truth is not there, we adopt government as our God and our identity.
That's good. Okay, so there's the character issue that I think was really important that we talked about, because again, I think there are legitimate qualms. I think there were legitimate cases to be made for both characters of the individuals. And again, this isn't me disparaging anyone. I would just say that the character, I think, was a pretty significant deal. So we'd love to hear from you. 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212. We're going to take one phone call. We've got Steve right now. Steve, are you there?
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing well. What's your point of view?
Thank you for taking my call. So I guess, thinking about why millennials, especially during maybe the Clinton administration time, was a comment that was made, started leaving evangelical Christianity in higher numbers. I just kind of think that during that time period, you think about the Clinton administration, the whole Monica Lewinsky ordeal. People started having to defend the presidency in unrealistic, immoral ways, saying, well, his sexual behaviors doesn't necessarily make him a bad president. And they actually had to lie to themselves to justify that kind of behavior. And that was happening across the board in a lot of different areas. And there was a big rise at the same time, and who knows why, but in a demanding of people to accept homosexuality, or else you're a hater.
Yeah, Steve, we're going to have to take a commercial break, but when we come back, we'll pick up with your comments. We'll be right back.
Imagine you work where you know people do not share your faith, and they certainly don't agree with a Christian view of life and culture. You are surrounded by hostility every single day. How important would it be to have solid information to back you up? Jim in South Carolina listens to Point of View in the afternoons. He writes, I teach in a public secular university and enjoy actually being a voice for the biblical Christian worldview in a liberal setting. Thank you for your ministry. Thank you for being bold and proclaiming truth. And Jim finishes, I pray for you daily. Jim works in hostile territory, and he prays for Point of View because Point of View is a source of truth. Please help us continue being here for Jim and everyone else. We need you to visit pointofview.net/team or call 1-800-347-5151 and join the Truth Team. Enable us to be here each day by giving each month. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is
Nick Pitts.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, and this is the May 2nd, 2018 edition of Point of View. We have been talking about evangelicalism and politics, and how a recent study that was put out and published on Christianity Today indicated that individuals that were born again before 2011 I guess you would say statistical significant contingent that were leaving the church, specifically 11.9% of the entire sample of evangelicals after the 2016 election left. When it broke it down between Clinton voters and Trump voters, 16.2% of those who said they voted for Clinton left evangelicalism after the 2016 election. When looked at Trump voters, that number was 8.8%. And so there was a significant number of people that were leaving evangelicalism after the 2016 election, and we have been taking some of your phone calls as well as talking through potentially why that could be. And so if you'd like to call in and leave your question or comment, you can call in at 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or you can jump on over to Facebook, facebook.com/pointofviewradio, and we will share your comment over the air as well. And so we'll take one of those comments right now. Ruth says, I had an issue with character of both candidates this year, but I think President Trump is redeemable. I'm not sure Hillary Clinton is redeemable. But then you drop to the vice president, and I'm 100% Mike Pence. And so it kind of moves towards just this low view of Hillary Clinton, which, again, is pretty, I would say, pretty standard for Republicans. Right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, quite a few Republicans didn't like Clinton, and mostly because of her character. But then you look at Donald Trump, and he's not exactly the pillar of morality either.
Yeah. So one of the fascinating things is there was a study that was put out by a media analysis group just to talk about Hillary Clinton, for example, based on Ruth's comment. And according to Axios, which kind of published it, they said that 13,000 TV commercials from January 1 to April 24th mentioned or showed a photo of Clinton, with more than 5,000 coming from Ohio, according to the data that was compiled. So this is after the election. The ghost of Hillary Clinton, largely conjured through the Ouija board of Republicans, 13,000 TV commercials from January 1 to April 24 mentioned or showed a picture of Hillary Clinton. And so I thought that's just, again, just so fascinating. And then obviously I have to address this. Just biblically, what we know to be true is that no one is irredeemable. The grace of Jesus, one of the beautiful things about it, there are a multitude of beautiful things, but what we continue to see with the grace of Jesus Christ is it draws those who are far away, have been brought near because of the blood of Christ. That God knew everything that we would be, yet still sent his son to die for us. That God has seen us at our worst and loved and showed us his best by sending his son to not only die for us, but to be resurrected so that we might live with him. And one of the beautiful things is, regardless of your political affiliation and regardless of your opinions, you have an opportunity to enter into a beautiful, loving, and vivacious life with Jesus if you just say yes to him. And so we always want to continue to show that politics does, it is an important part of our lives, but it's not the ultimate part, because we recognize the truth from Philippians 3:20 that we are citizens of another kingdom, that being the kingdom of heaven. But as members of the kingdom of heaven, we shouldn't be so heavenly minded that we're not earthly good, channeling Jeremiah 29:7 of working for the welfare of our city, of making his kingdom come, his will be done on earth as it is in heaven, because we know in heaven there's the fullness of joy. In heaven, we experience a life and a life to the fullness. And so we want to be active proponents of working for the good in our communities, for the glory of his name, for the good of this world, and for the joy of our soul. But we continue to see in this 2016 election, largely individuals were largely leaving the church because of politics. And so we're going to continue taking your phone calls, 800-351-1212. We're going to jump on over to Georgia right now. Paul in Georgia. Are you there, Paul?
Yes, I am. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing well, Paul. What's your point of view?
Well, my point of view is I've been going to church for a pretty good while. When election time comes, there always seems to be a division. And one of the biggest problem I've seen, especially on this last election, is the pastor of the church telling people of the church, vote for a particular party or a particular person, or you're going to go to hell, and we don't want you in the church. And the church gets divided, and people get divided after election, just like this one was, and arguing about who should have won and all this. And instead of talking out the differences and finding a common ground to work on the real issues of why we don't want particular people in control of our government and our country.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really great point. There's just it's just very we're just living in a fascinating age, and I'm appreciative that you brought up the contextual, like from a timeline perspective. Jonathan, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean he mentions a lot of churches, kind of taking a side on this, and I was kind of curious of that earlier. If there's any numbers of that would correlate to these numbers listed, the 16.2%. Of Clinton supporters that left the church and the 8.8% of Trump supporters that left the church. I wonder if there's any numbers out there that correlate to the amount of churches that, supported either candidate, and maybe, the individuals, the congregation might have felt alienated or like pushed out depending on their political beliefs.
Yeah, I think you bring up a great point. And so the only numbers that I'm aware of is kind of that 81% that continues to loom around us. And so the 81% being that white evangelicals, because largely evangelicals in that 81% poll that's always mentioned were white in nature, or they were just identified as individuals being Caucasian. And so what they said is that 81% of evangelicals voted for President Trump. And then you take into account there's probably a margin of error in that. And so we'll say for purposes, it's usually standard for around 3 to 5%. And then that kind of leaves that whole 16% that left the church. So it seems to be the 16% that left the church just didn't vote for it. And it's just, again, what frustrates me is that, yes, the gospel of Jesus Christ has implications in the political world, but that ultimately, though, there's greater implications for the gospel of Jesus Christ, which is eternity. And so I just think that there is lessons to be learned from 2016, and hopefully we can learn those, because the thing about, if the Lord tarries, one of these elections is going to happen again here in a few months, as well as in a couple of years during the 2020 presidential election. We're going to jump on over to Michigan right now. We've got Mark in Michigan. Mark, are you there?
Yep.
Hey, Mark, what's your point of view?
Well, I was just thinking about the last election, and, you hate to see church splits. You hate to see people leave the faith or leave an organization. But really what it came down to me, seems like the two different candidates obviously were not morally perfected, but the one that had the closest to the biblical principles is the one I voted for. And sometimes we need to look at what we believe and support that, and focus in on the principles. What is this person supporting? What kind of policies are they going to be putting forth? And does that line up with the Bible? And how does that going to affect our future? And I think that's important.
Yeah, I think I completely agree with you, Mark. I think one of the first things that we need to have is a biblical worldview, or maybe a biblical paradigm through which to be able to see these issues. And so one of the distressing things that I read is a poll that was out of Lifeway that indicated that only, I believe it was 9% of it was either 9 or 19% of evangelicals that said that the Bible informed their view on immigration. And I would really hope that the Bible would inform all our views on a host of issues. And now, granted, there are going to be issues that it just doesn't speak to, but I would dare say that the living and active word that's able to prepare me and equip me to be the man of God that I'm called to be is going to speak towards those issues. It might not give us clear yes or no's, but it might give us direction by which to see. Right, Jonathan?
Yeah, I mean, when you don't have, this kind of goes to ultimate truth, when you don't have a foundational ultimate truth, and it's all up to you, and it's all, your truth is, whatever you want it to be.
Yeah. So it's just increasingly important for us to have like a biblical framework to be able to think through these issues. And again, let's just think about what the biblical narrative is. Let's think about it from what the Bible says that it is. It says in Psalm 119, it is a light to our path and a guide for our feet, right? A lamp to our path, rather. And so it's an opportunity for us just to see how it's illuminating us. We see that it's a sharp, double-edged sword that's living and active, which indicates to us that it's still applicable today, even though it was written thousands of years ago. It's an opportunity for us to see how it might speak to the issues of our day. And then we also see how it's able to equip us so that we might be the men and women of God, equipped and fully able to do the works that Christ Jesus has set out before us, according to 2 Timothy 3:16 and 17. And so it's important for us to be able to see that this living and active word that's a light to our path and a guide to our feet is able to help us understand as we make our way through Washington or local, state, and Capitol buildings. And so we're going to continue to talk about this and more, not 800-351-1212, but we'll take a break and be back right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Steed Labotsky graduated from the United States Air Force Academy in 1992. He eventually found his way back to campus, this time as the tight ends coach for the Academy's football team. And like other coaches, he has a Twitter account where he describes himself as a follower of Christ, family man, and football coach. Perhaps like many of you, Coach Labotsky often posts verses from the Bible on his Twitter account. This angered an activist group, labeling his tweets as unchecked Christian extremism, and they demanded that the Academy put an end to it. The Academy looked into it and determined that, in fact, the Twitter account was a personal account not connected with the Academy, rightly concluding that it was, quote, committed to protecting an individual's right to practice any religion they choose or no religion, provided their practices do not violate policy or law or impede mission accomplishment, military readiness, unit cohesion, standards, or discipline. The activist response was vulgar and promised more antagonism against the institution, but the Academy made the right call. Had the Academy punished the coach for his personal tweets, they would have been hostile towards religion rather than neutral as the First Amendment demands. Our airmen may give up a lot to serve our country, but they do not give up religious liberty in their planes, on the gridiron, or on Twitter. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
And welcome back to Point of View. I am Nick Pitts, your host of today's edition of May 2nd, 2018, joined by Jonathan Bodnar in studio. We've been talking about evangelicals and politics, largely the new study that came out and published by Christianity Today that indicated that evangelicals after the 2016 election saw a number of individuals that were identified as born again before 2011 exit evangelicalism. Specifically looking at the numbers on totality, it was 11.9%, but when you broke down the numbers relative to who they were supporting, 16% of Clinton supporters left, 8% of Trump supporters left, and we have been taking your phone calls as to your point of view as to why that might be. So you can continue calling in 800-351-1212. Again, that number is 800-351-1212, or Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. Again, Facebook.com/pointofviewradio. We've been taking some of your comments and questions on there as well. So we'll continue taking phone calls. We'll jump on over to California with Jim. Jim, are you there?
Hey, I'm here.
Hey, California. How are you, Jim?
Oh, roasting right now. It's getting up in the 80s here.
Okay. Don't rub it in, okay, Jim? Just go ahead and share your point of view, okay?
All right. Hey, I got two children. One's graduating from UCLA this year. The other one's going to Sacramento State. And I was listening to what you guys were talking about earlier, and it's fascinating with my daughter's the one going to UCLA, and her influence upon other friends coming from the fact the way I raised her. And we had they came from a broken home. My was divorced from my first wife, and so I raised them. And it is true that we need to have, it is family that has to work on your children. And like the Bible says, it says train up a child. It doesn't say teach them. It says train. And if we don't instill those principles into our children when they're young, they're going to be influenced a lot more by the world. And my two children have kind of come after me on some of the things from politics, but both supporting Trump. My daughter actually asked for me to bring Trump flags for her and other things, and she's not scared to wear it or post it there at UCLA. And my son, talking about the gay issue, I've watched him because he has a couple gay friends, and we communicate and talk, but he always treats them like a Christian should. And in that, I see, dealing with all their friends and a lot of their other, a lot of their friends, who some of them are liberal, most have no opinion. They may, like you said earlier, their parents were Democrats. But, when I walk in there and I hand them a Trump shirt, and I go, here you go, they go put it on and off they go. So it's like, it's been a kind of a kick. And probably the other thing I want to mention is, we have an issue with, voting for the least of two evils. Well, unfortunately, we're always going to have the least of two evils because Jesus is not running for office today. And I think as Christians, we need to look at that God uses those who stand up and listen to his call, whether we agree. Looking at Trump, I was not a first supporter of Trump. I was a Rand Paul guy. And I'm heavily involved in politics for 40 years. My kids went to the pro-life walks. I walked them through that. I was at even in high school. So politics is a big part of my life just because I understand from a Christian's viewpoint, if we don't engage, the enemy does. And we need to be part of that. And I see too many Christians looking at, like you said earlier with Trump, the guy ain't perfect. But you know what? You look at Israel and the example of the heathen kings that Israel had, and he had to raise up women to take charge. He had to raise up other heathen kings to take charge because those people weren't answering his call to serve. And I think that's our challenge in all of this as we go forward, especially with millennials, because too many of them aren't taught economics or the aspect of what happens with their viewpoint. And talking to these kids in school today, I get frustrated at the fact that they think I'm a Nazi, and yet I look at them and I go, but I'm sitting here helping people, giving aid to people, doing missionary work for people. I said, I'm colorblind to pigment color. And, those are the things, like even with my kids, I've instilled with them. And so I don't know. Being in the battle and dealing with what we deal with, Christians need to step up and remember it isn't Republican or Democrat. It's what would Jesus do. And, as long as the Republicans keep in their platform the life movement, I'll be a Republican right now. But, if they go to remove that, well, it always comes down to what would Jesus do. And, and he's a dictator. It's his way or no way. It's either you believe in him or you ain't getting to heaven. And you know what? I don't have a problem with the fact that he loved me so much he died for me.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jim. You bring up a great point relative to raising up your kids. I love the imagery from Psalm 127 that describes them like an arrow in the quiver of a warrior. So it's this understanding that you just shoot it off, and hopefully the arrow, you want to guide it along the way in order that it might move towards the glory of God and the good of the world. And so just increasingly important for our parents that are listening to guide their children in such a way that they might be not only productive citizens of this world, but also God-glorifying servants of our King as well. And so we'll take one more phone call, and we'll jump on over to Cody in North Carolina. Cody, you there?
Yes, sir.
Hey, Cody, what's your point of view?
My point is that, it's the same today as it's always been, but I just see that it's becoming more polarized. And what it comes down to is that people are always going to try to conform. They always want to be accepted. But at the same time, they want to claim to be Christians. And really, when you look at the scriptures, there are two things that Christians need to understand right off the get-go, is that, one, exclusivity is not popular in our culture today. Exclusivity is anathema to this inclusive, everyone and everything is acceptable. What's true for you is true for you, like relativism. And it's just not the case. And when you look at Jesus saying that he is the way, the truth, the life, there is no alternative. He's not a way. He's not the best way. He's the way. And that is going to fly straight in the face of anyone that you're talking to that is not a Christian, who thinks that all belief systems are equal and all cultures are equal. Right off the get-go, that in of itself is going to ruffle some feathers. And the second is that no one likes to feel like they're wrong or that they inherently are evil, which once again the Christian has to admit that you can't accept the good news that Jesus Christ died for us if you don't accept the bad news that he had to die for something, and that was the fact that our sin that we're born into has kept us from ever being able to have a relationship with God. So once again, convincing someone who doesn't believe that they're that bad of a person and this, that, and the other is a very difficult task. So when you have a very polarized election like this, people come together and they, ultimately have to sit there at their workplace or with their friends over dinner and whatnot. And when they're asked these questions, they fold because the exclusivity, the responsibility that Christ gave to us in following him, people fold. And I don't want to drag it out too long, but I mean, you see that in the Bible. You see these giant masses of people that want to follow Jesus, and then he would stop and he would preach the word, and he would say some hard things that people didn't really want to hear.
That's exactly what I was just thinking about, Cody, because it's this understanding that we're never going to elect a perfect person, but we do hope that individuals are moving towards what we call sanctification. Better today than yesterday, better tomorrow than today. And a key part of sanctification, what Martin Luther said, that all of Christian life is one of repentance. And so wanting to acknowledge we're not perfect, but we're moving towards perfection. Thank you all so much for listening. I've been Nick Pitts, Jonathan Bodnar. Thank you so much. We'll see you tomorrow.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of view can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants his best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.